As much as the Nintendo Switch may have greased the gaming world up, its grandfather the Wii had a pretty good run in its own right, with over 100 million consoles sold. So, naturally, you'd think that Nintendo would be proud of the little guy, and not to gloat or anything, but I can totally relate to being the child of proud parents given my status as a T-ball MVP, not to mention all the money I've been given to charity over the years, even as recently as last night. Hey, Charity, you want to make another 10 bucks?
I'm sorry, honey, I'm all booked up for the next 4 hours.
Well, I'll see you in 4 hours then. Yeah, I've lived a pretty good and honest life with a squeaky clean background, but after doing a little bit of detective work, I can't exactly say the same thing about the Wii, despite all the good that console may have done. And look, I'd never consider airing anyone's dirty laundry or anything like that, but seeing as how Nintendo's president, Ricky Nintendo, borrowed my boogie board and never gave it back to me, I'm gonna go ahead and tell you the 10 darkest secrets about the Wii that Nintendo wishes you just forget about. Number 10, Wii damage. Wii's biggest selling point for the casual market was definitely the motion controls, because instead of getting your calcium-deficient ass off your couch to actually go amount to something, you could just get tennis elbow from the discomfort of your own living room, which apparently was actually a thing that happened to a few people. As hilarious as that might be, though, the Wii damage that I'm referring to has got less to do with people's limbs and more to do with the countless TVs that were broken because nobody could hold on to their Wii remotes when they were swinging them. And well, for whatever reason, this seemed to be a lot more common with the tennis minigame than anything else as seen on the Home Shopping Network. I mean, aside from my tennis instructor losing his temper and disciplining me whenever I lost scrimmages, there were somehow more people throwing Wii remotes than actual tennis rackets. Regardless of how throwing Wii remotes was so common to begin with though, Nintendo foresaw this problem and actually put warnings in every game encouraging players to wear that wrist strap, but apparently most Wii owners absolutely refused to wear a strap. Unlike Charity. Hell, sometimes people were swinging the Wii remote so hard that even the strap couldn't handle the force, which led to Nintendo replacing them for free. To be fair, it's really not Nintendo's fault that so many people had a poor grip and thought about their dads while they were swinging the Wii remotes, but you can still imagine that there being entire websites dedicated to the damage done by Wiis is always going to be a bit of a soft spot for Nintendo. Number 9, early motion controls sucked horse. Sure, it was pretty cool to swing your Wii remote like a baseball bat to get prepared for your life of debt collecting, or I guess T-ball if you think you could hang with me, but the problem was that it didn't really matter what direction you swung it in, seeing as how any movement with the Wii remote essentially acted the same as pressing a button. Hell, there were even ports that remapped certain actions from buttons to swinging, and Nintendo just kinda hoped you'd do the correct motions while assuming it mattered how you were actually swinging it. If you ask me, this problem was most obvious in the launch title Twilight Princess that was originally made for the GameCube. E3 videos showing gameplay from the Wii version suckered a lot of people into thinking that the sword swings would be more precise, myself included, but the reality ended up being that it didn't really matter what you did with your Wii remote. I hope that swing was precise enough. Cool. Nintendo would eventually provide more detailed motion controls with the Wii Motion Plus, but you either had to buy an add-on or an entirely new controller, and for the most part, this was an upgrade, but personally, I didn't really care for the gyro controls when it came to aiming things, which of course brings us to number 8, they pretty much abandoned the pointer controls. The Wii got a lot of crap for its gimmicky control methods being forced into games that really didn't need them, but it was something that I've always hated myself. But I'll fight to the death defending pointer controls, because I think that having them as an option improved any games that involved any kind of aiming whatsoever. Sure, the sensor bar cord was unnecessarily long and always got tangled up for no reason, but pointing at the screen's just way more accurate than any gyroscopic controls that I've ever used. And honestly, I'll take a sensor bar that I never even think about after I set it up over having to recalibrate my controller every 5 minutes like in Skyward Sword. Even if you hate pointer controls with sensor bars though, it's still pretty weird for Nintendo to essentially take a controller feature away before the end of the generation it was introduced in. Despite the Joy-Cons improving upon pretty much everything the Wii remotes introduced, I still feel like Nintendo abandoning pointer controls for the more convenient but less accurate gyro controls would be like Nintendo 64 not having L or R buttons or the GameCube not having an analog stick. Given that Nintendo always prides themselves on making innovations for the future, it's probably not ideal that I'm talking about something that they decided was better left in the past. Number 7, the patent lawsuits. Every time Nintendo creates a non-conventional product of any kind, there always seem to be people coming out of the woodworks to claim that their ideas were stolen, and the Wii's no exception. In 2013, a small Texas-based company called iLife filed a patent infringement lawsuit because it felt like the Wii remote's motion controls were just an ass hair too similar to their medical monitors, which were meant to automatically call ambulances whenever old people fell down, or if babies were at risk from dying from sudden infant death syndrome, which I had no idea was a thing. I'm not gonna make a joke about that, you sicko. Get back to the video. Unlike most of the above-average sized N's other lawsuits, though, iLife was actually able to win $10 million in 2017, but even though the same company was able to get Fitbit to settle out of court, Nintendo's not one to lie down in legal battles, and they were actually able to get out of this pickle in 2020 by winning an appeal since the judge felt like the idea was too abstract of an idea to rip off.
I sure hope that defense holds up in my lawsuit with Disney over my intro.
Even though Nintendo managed to thwart iLife, though, it'll still go down as a headache that costed them a lot of time, money, and effort that could have been better spent on something else, like, making a new Ice Climber game or something, I don't know. Number 6, all that friggin' shovelware. After the big crash in 1983, part of Nintendo's strategy to revive the video game industry in North America was to limit how many games developers could release on the NES. That way, if you decided to pick a random NES game up at Caldor's, the chances of it being good were a lot higher than they would have been on the Atari 2600. But then after 2 console generations of third parties not even wanting to be seen with them in the Youth Chili Cook-Off, Hedgehog decided that they'd be a little more lenient when it came to the Wii and let any developer pretty much do whatever they wanted. This ultimately led to anybody and everybody who can make anything resembling a video game pumping something out onto the Wii, especially on the WiiWare section of the eShop. And it's because of this leniency that the Wii's library had over 1,500 games, which would be cool if they were good, but most of them sucked, which is why the Wii's legacy is not as respected as it really should be. Like, yeah, it might sound great to have options, but when only a small percentage of those games are actually good, it's definitely a huge problem, because while more games might lead to more money in the short term, burning people for trying new stuff just means that good games are more likely to remain buried, even with the internet's existence helping people make educated choices with the help of reviews. Which, wasn't really a thing everybody was doing before this era. I know the shovelware problem's actually worse on the Switch since users can't rate games anymore, but you know what? I think the blame lies on the Wii for starting this trend of holding unproven developers to such low standards. Ironically though, Nintendo letting publishers run wild really just ended up hurting everybody because... Number 5, third-party games sold terribly. After the 64 and GameCube repelled third parties even worse than I did with my ex-wife Chili, Nintendo was finally able to get them back since the Wii was doing so well that publishers didn't really have a choice but to support it. However, aside from rhythm games and a few other exceptions, most third-party titles never really caught fire on the Wii. Most of this had to do with the fact that multiplats on the Wii sucked off it enough that nobody really wanted to give any of them a chance, even though some of them did have a lot of effort put into them. But aside from the SmackDown vs. Raw games letting you do motion-controlled suckets, the Wii versions of games were usually just watered-down garbage meant to make a quick buck off of the console's popularity, so your best bet was usually just to steer clear of anything on the Wii that wasn't made by Nintendo themselves. Number 4, nobody cared about the channels. The Wii's attempt to appeal to the casual market and be more than just a video game console, Nintendo offered various channels in the home menu for news, weather, as well as some silly stuff like voting on random topics. Sounds pretty useless now since these kinds of things are just easier and more convenient to do on your phone, but in 2006 I actually thought this was pretty cool and, honestly, kinda wish it was still a thing on Nintendo consoles. Unfortunately though, not many other people agreed with me, seeing as how Nintendo didn't even wait for the Wii to die before discontinuing these altogether. Oddly enough, there's actually a small hacking community that wanted to keep the magic alive with Reconnect 24, but speaking of hacking, number 3, it was easy as frig to hack. As you may or may not know, Nintendo's about as good at preventing hacking as my dad is at preventing my dumbass from taking candy from strangers, so they've kinda brought this one upon themselves. Me and Hedgehog did come up with a virtual console in the hopes that they can make some easy money off their library of classic games, which did end up working to an extent, especially with me. But as if computer emulation wasn't enough of an incentive to avoid paying for classic titles, hacking your Wii to be able to play pretty much any game in history was actually relatively easy, even at the time. So not only could you avoid paying for games that you'd later not be able to transfer at any future consoles, but you could also play the ones that Nintendo wasn't even legally allowed to sell, making this an overall better option for most people, which surely cut into Nintendo's profits and made them look like dinguses for being incapable of preventing this in the first place. Number 2, its final years were atrociously painful. The Wii's launch might have had a few problems, but overall the first year of the console's life had some pretty decent games. And after all, it did manage to instantly sell out for a few years, and it ended up with over 100 million units sold, but around 2010, the software sales took a mortal blow, and it just kept bleeding more and more with each passing year. And I mean, I know it's pretty normal for consoles to slow down later in their life cycles, but the friggin' Wii U didn't come out till 2013, so what the frig was Nintendo thinking with 3 years of nothing on the Wii? Once the novelty of the motion controls had completely worn off, the casual market just decided to play mobile games for the rest of existence, while the average gamer just wanted to use a traditional controller and not have to deal with the hardware limitations. Speaking of hardware limitations, among other things, number 1, it was not respected by the hardcore gamers.
My whole life, I don't get no respect. No respect from anyone.
These days, I always say that graphics matter less than ever before, but to me, the 7th console generation was the final era where they really did make a huge difference, with games on the PS3 and Xbox 360 always looking significantly better than they did on the Wii. In fact, it was usually so much so to where it actually affected the gameplay itself. And, well, because of this, the Wii was pretty much considered the laughingstock of the gaming world. What really sealed the deal of disrespect, though, was Nintendo's heavy focus on the casual market that ultimately ended up just abandoning them in the end anyway, cause, well, I mean, that's kind of the definition of what the casual market is. Be like inviting that snake-in-the-grass rat bastard Ryan Statlander over to your Christmas party and then acting mad or surprised when he orders a pay-per-view on the Dirt Bike channel. Like, how can you not know this was gonna happen, Nintendo? I know it kinda sounds like I'm saying it serves Nintendo right for ignoring the core fan base to cater to the casual market, but in the interest of fairness, I would argue that there are probably some gamers today that were a result of being reeled in on the Wii. But even though most people stopped riding bikes with training wheels, aside from my neighbor Terry, he lost most of his motor functions in the explosion in that mysterious chemistry lab anyway, but for the most part, the entire industry pretty much moved on from the Wii's tomfoolery that used to be the talk of the town, though. While I agree that even some of Nintendo's first-party games don't really deserve respect, though, it's kind of a shame that for the longest time you'd get your ass kicked just for saying nice things about the amazing games that the Wii did have to offer.
Even with all the games that don't hold up all that well, though, I don't think the Wii was Nintendo's worst home console as far as game quality and quantity is concerned, though. You know what? It's also not Nintendo's best home console either, especially after all these dark and shameful secrets it just drug out of its toolshed, so needless to say, the thing's definitely not pure. Not me, though. Nah, in fact, I'll probably get one of those little Nobel Peace Trophy thingies or whatever just for airing all the Wii's dirty laundry, but to tell you the truth, I'd trade it all in just to get my boogie board back, but knowing Ricky from Nintendo, that's probably never gonna happen. Oh, huh, jeez. I wonder who that could be. Cameron Industries, Cameron speaking.
If you ever want to see your precious boogie board again, then meet me at these coordinates.
Oh no, not my boogie!
Oh no, not my boogie!
What the? Charity, what are you doing with my boogie?
Some guy gave it to me for payment, but I'll give it to you for $10, honey.
But Charity, $10 is all I have left.
Well, then you're gonna have to choose. It's either the boogie or the gummer.
What are you talking about, a gummer? That sounds gross. I just wanted you to water my houseplant.
Gummer's just my favorite brand of chewing gum, of course.
Well, I suppose if it won't prevent this video from making its $3, then I guess I'll try the gum out.
Well, I could shit bitch ass in your if you want.
Mom, if you're watching this, don't listen to her. She's lying.